George Washington. Arguably, there is no other person in American history that is as well known as the man who first held the president's office. Washington epitomizes the spirit of the American Revolution, as well as the formation of a new kind of government that would truly revolutionize the world. The majority of Americans can name at least one fact about him. So much about George Washington is shredded in a picture that is truly larger than life, that he almost seems to be a legend or a myth. Yet when it comes to his faith, people continue to question where he aligned his beliefs, if he had any at all. Marcus Cunliffe notes, a prodigious amount of nonsense has been written about Washington in the 200 years since his death, and much of this nonsense has had to do with religion. Some people believe that he was a devout Anglican. Presbyterian minister and contemporary of Washington, Ashbel Green, believed that Washington did indeed have a personal faith and was private about it due to the, quote, properties of his station, while others, like Joseph Ellis, say that he was a deist, that he was never a deeply religious man, at least in the traditional Christian sense of the term. Washington thought of a God as a distant and personal force, the presumed wellspring for a destiny that he called Providence. And yet others, such as Kieran O'Keefe, contended that he was a latitudinarian. He states that he favored broad religious liberty for Christians and non-Christians alike, reflecting his latitudinarian beliefs because he believed that denomination, dogma, doctrine, and creed were less important than basic faith, and that it was up to the individual to worship God in their own way. While Washington did not directly communicate his personal beliefs, a plethora of written statements refer to Providence as the protector of not only his own life, but also that of the causes of the American Revolution and the establishment of our new country. Surely faith was an intricate part of his life, but to what extent? Washington was raised in the Anglican Church, and according to the religious traditions, his parents had him baptized on April 16, 1732. Though he consistently attended church during his youth, there is some speculation as to his regular attendance throughout his adult life, and even more so in his apparent refusal to take communion, though his wife Martha engaged in communion without fail. This, along with the lack of Washington's direct use of Jesus' name in his writings, are the main reasons stated by those who believe that he did not have a personal faith. Conversely, the numerous amounts of times that Washington referred to Providence in his both private and public writings creates a case for his faith that one is personal. In a letter written to his brother John during the French and Indian War, he writes, quote, "By the miraculous care of Providence that protected me beyond all human expectation, I had 4 bullets through my coat and 2 horses shot under me, and yet escaped without harm." During the beginning stages of the American Revolution, he wrote, quote, "To secure God's support, the soldiers would not only have to fire their muskets well, but also behave in a way that the Lord would admire." After the war, Washington wrote, "The great dictator of events has carried us through a variety of scenes during this long and bloody contest in which we have been for 7 campaigns, most notably struggling." As the Constitutional Congress began their work, Washington stated, "I earnestly pray that the omnipotent being who has not yet deserted the cause of America in its hour of extreme hazard may never yield so far a heritage of anarchy or despotism." During his inaugural address, Washington invited those present to recognize God's hand in the proceedings of a new and free government. Despite these and numerous other quotes during Washington's professional life, there are also a plethora of examples from his personal life. When writing to his friend Anna Stockton about the immortality of the soul, Washington wrote, quote, "I will say, if I am in a grateful delusion, it is an innocent one, and I am willing to remain under its influences." Countless people testify to his strong moral convictions and actions throughout his entire life. Even in times of personal sadness, Washington consistently recommends that he and others holds to the, quote, comfort of religion. An example of this is when his nephew Augustine was dying after a long battle of tuberculosis, and Washington wrote to him, "The will of heaven is not to be scrutinized by the children of this world. It therefore becomes the creatures of it to submit with patience and resignation to the will of our Creator, whether it be to prolong or to shorten the number of their days. On a snowy day in December 1799, Washington was marking trees that needed to be cut around Mount Vernon. His clothes were soaked and he became chilled. The Washingtons had dinner guests, and as always, being the mannered gentleman, he did not want them to have to wait, so he chose not to change out of his wet clothes. The next day, even though he was not feeling well, he felt that the work needed to be completed. This would be the last time that he surveyed his beloved Mount Vernon. The next morning, he woke up with a sore throat. Martha called for the family doctor, but while they waited, according to the traditions of the day, he was bled out and lost about 1/3 of his blood. The next day, he took his own pulse, recorded the results, and those in the room with him stated that after he recorded it, he looked contented with his fate, laid his head down, and rested. He died shortly thereafter. According to Tobias Lear, Washington died the way that he lived. He lived out the advice that he had given to his nephew. He submitted with patience and resignation to the will of his Creator.